conversation.
waiting. You. Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay. Well, I am going to be talking about Let's Scare Jessica to Death and The Grave
Ooh,
of the
yes.
Vampire. And one thing, as I said, I'm going to talk about the politics a bit first, too. I thought what was really fascinating about this whole period is the fact that you have, the beginning of the Civil Rights movement at the beginning of the early 60s. And then you have that developing into the women's rights movement because you had women going to, down south, trying to get out the vote and everything. And then they're realizing that they really don't have any power because these men are still, making them do all the basic, household chores and whatnot. So they start their own movement. And you have this, there's a basic consciousness of like, I think it starts around like 1963 with, Betty Friedan writing her, her famous Feminine Mystique. And it's really
I've read
about
that.
how, have you read that?
Yeah, a long time ago. My mom had
Anyway,
it.
I've also read it. Yeah.
oh, okay. Because she talks about how, it's supposed to be a great life for women to be married and everything, but what really happens, they become, neurotic, psychotic, crazy, and everything. And
Diary
so
of a
this
Mad
becomes a
Housewife.
huge hit. Yeah, this becomes a huge hit. And then, of course, you've got the civil rights movement going on. And you've got, this in raw shapes like the women's movement. And you have them talking about how, women are going crazy because they are oppressed by the patriarchy. You have like Valerie Solanas writing her, I don't remember if you've read it, the Scum Manifesto.
Scum Manifesto.
Yep.
Yeah.
Feminist scholar
And
here. Hello.
you do know that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it
Okay.
too.
That is a really crazy work. I mean, she talks about how men are like animals; they're
Yeah,
half dead.
I think I see it as a work of humor. I mean, it has truth in it, but she's so over the top, and I don't know if she is.
Yeah,
That was trying to when
Yeah.
you watch I Shot Andy Warhol. Lily Taylor kind of plays it on the edge, like she does believe it, but she kind of knows some of it is over the top. She just
yeah,
deliberately wants to shock people. She was great in
yeah,
that. I loved her.
yeah. There's a lot of that. I mean, it just really comes out there, and
I haven't read
I'm
it, but
the
we
whole
learned about it
person
in
who like
college.
say,
So
sorry, what?
I said I haven't
What did
read
you
the
say?
Scum Manifesto, but I learned about it in college.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
It was published in
Okay.
1967. This is like a bit of a tangent
Great
too, but I've
year.
always wondered if that sort of portrayal of men as animalistic, half diseased, kind of inspired I guess it's Richard Burns' Lamora, because you have all these male
Oh yeah, Lamora.
zombies
We've
from
talked a lot.
they're actually
Yeah,
vampires, but they look like
lesbian vampires.
zombies, and it almost feels like and
Well,
but they feel
we've
like
talked about that.
yeah.
There's levels, and I don't want to jump in and try to sound like I know it all, but I did know Richard Blackburn, not real well,
Okay,
but we
yeah.
corresponded in the late '90s. I interviewed him, and he explained Lamore to me as it's the Clash that decades later was borrowed or just coincidentally came up with what's the series with Celine, the character played by Kate Beckinsale, where she's killing
I don't know that.
vampires. It's
Underworld.
Underworld.
yes,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
war between vampires and werewolves. So
Mm-hmm.
Richard Blackburn was the first guy to do that on camera. And you're not really they're kind of having a war. Like Lamora takes over the community, and then all these other people, they're degraded, and they're kind of like, some of them are vampires, but some of them are like werewolves and feral, like they're
Right.
almost devolving, and
Yeah. They never
that's
really
an
make it
incredible
clear.
movie. We've never
Yeah.
talked about that on here, but we should.
Yeah.
I really, and
One
talking to
of
him
these
about it,
days.
I was like, wow, this is so amazing. Go ahead.
I do wonder if it was inspired by by the women's movement, or at least, by Valerie
Lamora,
Solanas'
he didn't
interpretation.
say
Yeah,
that directly
because
to me, but he did say that he wanted that element of the strong woman, and his timing was good because, as Kaylyn's going to also tell us,
mhm.
the lesbian vampire movement it blew up mostly in Europe, but
Mm-hmm.
Lamora was one of the
Yeah,
great American ones, and the timing was so incredible, and I just love that era. I just love that whole vibe. But go ahead,
yeah. Okay,
talk to
so
us about Jessica or politics of
okay,
Jessica.
okay. Well, I think Jessica really does borrow a lot from it because that's coming around the end of the I think it was actually made in the fall of 1970. I don't remember exactly. I know it was 1970, and it really picks up a lot of these themes because if when you start off, you have Jessica wondering if she's really sane. I'm just seeing if I can get the exact
Hmm.
quotation. Let me see that.
Yeah, I didn't see Jessica through the lens of Diary of a Mad Housewife, but that's pretty dead on.
They did compare it.
that.
Yeah, actually, I think one of the authors, one of the critics on Let's Scare Jessica does mention that that Zora Lampert's interpretation is much like Diary of a Mad Housewife,
And she got cheated out of the Oscar.
Woman Under the Influence, the Rain People
oh my
images.
God, all great, incredible. Gina Rollins in Woman Under the Influence is like one of the great screen performances of all time.
Okay.
But Diary of a Mad Housewife, what's her name, Carrie Snodgrass, she got nominated for an Oscar. She was beaten by Glenda Jackson for Men in Love or Women in Love, which I actually have on Blu-ray Criterion, and it's a good movie. And she's incredible, but she wasn't Carrie Snodgrass in Diary of a Mad Housewife. She needed that fucking Oscar, and she died young. It was kind of and she married Neil Young, and he was very abusive to her, and that was disappointing to read. But my mom knew she was, but I never saw the movie until like a few years ago, and I've done 2 videos on it that are on this channel, and they were they were somewhat viewed. But anyway, go ahead. Let's talk about Jessica. I keep going off.
Okay, yeah. Well, anyway, so you have her. The beginning and end of the movie actually talks about whether she's. She asks herself whether she's living in madness or sanity. So I think that it really does allude to this whole idea of women being driven crazy in the patriarchy, and this just keeps up popping up quite a bit. Yeah. So anyway, the basic plot. I think do all of you know you've all probably seen it, right?
I haven't.
Oh, you haven't?
Where they move from.
I've seen it.
Oh, wow. Okay. So anyway, it's basically Jessica and her husband, Duncan, and their friend, Woody, who moved from, I think, New York to one of the rural suburbs around there. Not exactly sure, but it's seemingly bucolic and beautiful. And they go to the new, or actually old house, and that's where they meet Emily, who turns out to be the vampire. And all these strange and disturbing things start happening there. I think the next day they're all bathing together, and Jessica thinks she's gotten attacked, but everyone's like, "Oh, there's nothing here at all." And then later on, they go to the town and they meet they notice that the townspeople are really hostile. And actually, you already see that towards the beginning because there's like, what are these hippies doing? Driving in here in a hearse. So there's all this sort of like stuff going on, and then you have Emily continually trying to seduce the men, and then she does try to seduce Jessica. And I think towards the end, it's just right after Emily tries to seduce Jessica, and she runs out to the town and she sees Duncan, and she notices that actually the antique dealer who had actually sold them that they were trying to sell a portrait of the vampire to, that he's still around, and all the men are running around in bandages. And I think when she finally gets back, and she's sleeping with Woody. Not Woody, but Duncan. He tells her that he wants to send her back to New York. And that's when she notices a cut on him. And she screams. And then you see Emily and all these townsmen, in the room. So she tries to escape. She tries to go on the ferry, but the ferryman won't let her. So she starts rowing, and she sees his hand come up from the bottom. And she stabs it, and it turns out to be her husband. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it's a really fascinating movie that you sort of wonder, okay, what is Emily all about? Is she a sort of symbol of America? Because I'm thinking of that, that song by The Who, American Woman, and they talk about the war machines and the ghettos.
The Guess
Who. The Guess Who, yeah. And
Bachman
you wonder
Turner,
if that's sort of, yeah. And then like all the men with their bandages. Is this like an allusion to the Vietnam
Do you feel
War?
like it's a movie that is a vampire movie kind of on the down low? Because that's how I experienced it.
Yes.
I feel like it's ambiguous. Yeah.
Like when I first saw it when I was a little kid, I didn't 100% realize it. That's what it was.
Yeah, first time I saw it, I didn't, and then later.
But I was real little.
Yeah, I read about it, and I didn't realize it was a vampire film. So,
but do you feel like the Emily character is a character like Lamora, or like a lot of these characters like Countess Bathory, who like seduce the woman who's disenchanted with suburban life? Because that seems to be a major trope.
Yeah, it's funny because I really did not think that the vampire theme was that strong, the vampire trope. I didn't really feel like she felt more like a ghost than anything else, I think.
So it's kind of one of those
But
cross
I did
cross
notice.
genre.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
I watched it not that long ago, again, during COVID. I did a whole lot of horror movie rewatches during COVID. I feel like, yeah, the vampire aspect of it is actually very obvious now at my current age. But
looking at
when I was like 10 or 11, she was just creepy. I didn't quite necessarily catch all of that. So I think it's that if you haven't seen it in a while, I would recommend maybe get a rewatch on it, especially if you were like me.
I think it's on TV.
And all I saw was the TV version of it, which was a little bit
That's what I saw as a kid.
cut and edited. And so when I finally did see it in its full uncut version, it was a little bit different experience, as an adult going back and watching it. It became more obvious to me. I think some of the cuts maybe made it less obvious,
And
there's also like a subtlety to it.
Yeah.
But I agree. I think this movie is just super, super creepy, and there's just an unsettling tone. I think that throughout, and I don't know how you really achieve that. I don't know if it's the combination of the cinematography or the pacing, the editing, or the music,
and her performance.
But there's just
a lot of
something about it.
I think there's a
lot of silence.
It's not an action-packed movie.
And that might be part of what creates that unease as well, is that silence, because we don't like silence, human beings.
What's going to fill that silence?
We fill in things with just ums and uhs and stuff because we can't stand awkward silence.
Right.
And this movie does let the silence just be there, or just the ambient sound of of grass in the wind. And stuff
they're
like
outdoors a lot.
And it really it's just an effectively eerie, creeping horror sensation throughout this. And
that's interesting, because with that title I kind of thought it might have been a comedy, but obviously it's not.
I thought for years that it was like a bunch of either high school girls, like Mean Girls, or college girls, Mean Girls, trying to pick on a Carrie White-like figure and drive her insane. But it wasn't that.
That's pretty much what I was expecting from it too. Yeah. I was just like, oh no.
Now,
but it didn't have much bullying. It had gaslighting, but no bullying.
A
lot of gaslighting.
Well, I've read about a film called I Dismember Mama that's like, this is not a spoof. Every review I was like, this is not a spoof. It sounds like a spoof, but it isn't.
It's not.
That's a fucked up movie.
Yeah.
Do you want to go to Grave of the Vampire?
Okay, no, actually, there was one more thing I wanted to say about it.
Okay, sure.
One thing I'm really wondering about is, the ending of it, because, it's rather pessimistic, because, obviously Emily is still there and all the men are there. And it's very different from, like, the early 60s movies where the vampire is finally vanquished, even though they keep popping up, like, in The Hammer. So I'm wondering if a lot of this is kind of reflecting what's going on in America at this point, that, there's nothing that's really resolved. Like, there are all these, like, there were these trials of policemen in New York at that time, to talk about police corruption. So I'm wondering if that's all sort of like feeds into this sort of like, malaise at the end of the, decade, that nothing is really going as they think it's going, like, the Vietnam War.
I do think people interpret the movie, which it was hard for me when I finally watched it uncut, and I had to kind of think about it. So I want to watch it again, but I know people who write about film and interpret it as feminist in a lot of ways, and also very existentialist. So, but
I get that.
Well, there was one quote. You could already feel that negativity brewing when we were making Jessica, that things weren't working out the way some of us had hoped and dreamed they would. I mean, I think that's about as close as he comes to it. And
that's us right now.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's made around the same time as Count Yorga too, and that has a pessimistic ending.
Oh yeah.
I think there was a lot of cultural pessimism at the time, because as you pointed out, like, the Vietnam War was not going well for the United States, and then like also just all these social movements that were going on, like, into like throughout the 60s and into the 70s. I feel like they were kind of like, some of them were losing steam a little bit, like, not across the board, but I think a lot of people were like, nothing's really changing, like, okay, we got people to talk about these issues that are impacting our society, but like, what's actually going to come of it? And I feel like there was some of that with like the civil rights movement. There was some of that with the feminist movement. There was some of that with like the gay and lesbian movement and so on. So,
and so if you think about it, like the vampire becomes a trope. I mean, the past returning to the present.
Sure.
You think that, it just really makes a lot of sense. And I thought
I have more thoughts on that kind of female vampire, but I'll wait till Kaelyn does hers because she's got some great examples. So talk to me about Grave of the Vampire. Is that the one with William Smith, right? It has kind of a weird twist to it.
Yeah, it's directed by John Hayes, and I have to remember, I really do not know who the actors are, except for the guy who plays the vampire, but it's Michael Pataki, and I believe he was actually in. Yeah, he was actually in Love at First Sight, but I don't remember. I don't know which character.
William Smith has done a lot of stuff. When I encountered him as a kid, he played Falconetti on Rich Man, Poor Man. That's how a lot of people knew him at first. But he was in a lot of biker movies, blaxploitation. He usually played a rough, ragged, unpleasant guy, even when he was the protagonist. Scott is doing some experimental filmmaking over here in the corner.
Yes,
but good. Hey, boy, what's up, man? All right, so Francis is going to tell us about William Smith in the The Grave of the Vampire. I've actually seen this movie 2 or 3 times.
Do you all know the plot? Do you all know the plot of the movie?
I'm not very familiar with that one.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I can't really express it, but I know it's hinging on the twist. Isn't it of like 2 brothers? And also the twist that he becomes a vampire.
It's his father.
I have this on VHS, but haven't watched it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's basically a father and son conflict. I mean, what happens at the beginning of the film is you have this couple who are making out in the cemetery, and the vampire comes out and kills the man.
As one does.
Yeah. And then she gives birth to this sort of like half human, half vampire entity. I mean, he will only suck blood. And I guess he's feeling guilty for all this, trouble that he's causing.
So this is a flashback, right?
It
just takes place before the modern day. Okay.
Yeah, it's really because I think a good half of it is really devoted to that. I think that whole thing was
see, when I first saw it, I didn't make the connection at first, which I guess was the intention, that William Smith was that child grown up.
Yeah.
And isn't it a matter that he doesn't know what he is, and then he kind of accepts his destiny and gets evil? Or am I mixed up?
They never really make it clear because, I think we don't know how exactly he feels that it's just. I mean, I guess maybe the fact that he's drinking blood, he thinks like, okay, my father must be a vampire. That's probably how he makes that connection. And I thought it was interesting because this was made in 1972 when they were discussing abortion. The passing of Roe v. Wade. Not passing, but
rest in peace.
Yeah.
It actually working.
That's taking place at this time because the doctor says to James's mother, I would really suggest an abortion. And she says, no, I don't want one. And so it is kind of interesting that, she doesn't take the abortion, but so she ends up with this, this half vampire child. And so anyway, later on, he goes and he, tries to hunt down his father. He discovers him in a folk mythology class. And that's where he finds out from this woman who kind of has a crush on him that this professor whose name is, I guess, Adrian Lockwood, is actually a vampire from the 17th century. He had immigrated from England. He was an English nobleman who had immigrated to Salem. And somehow he is also the same Caleb Croft who was like a strangler in Boston or in Massachusetts. I think actually they did say Boston.
That sounds kind of like a Kolchak plot.
And then died. Yeah. And it's funny because this is, of course, right after the whole Boston Strangler thing when, I think he was caught in 1969. So it's really picking up on that as well, too. But I thought it was symbolic in how, you have this little boy who's draining all the blood from his mother. And it's like all the things that Betty Friedan talks about, how, women sap the energy out of, men. I mean, sorry, how how men sap the energy out of women, especially the kids. Yeah, exactly.
Freudian slip.
Yeah, exactly. And towards the end, it's interesting because you have the part where the vampire invites all the graduate students to his house, and he attacks all of them. And the only ones that are left are this woman named Anne, who's become James's lover, and you have a fight on between James and his father. They're duking it out. And
so remind me, what is the name of William Smith's character?
James.
Okay, that is James. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah, that
forgot
is James.
that. Yeah. Okay, and he is now a fully realized vampire.
And I think actually the vampire is played by Michael Pataki.
Yes, you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
Absolutely correct.
he was actually in Love at First Sight, but I just couldn't figure out which character it was.
He was in a lot of small roles in vampire and horror movies of that's very good. But so go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So
I thought
anyway,
William Smith was great in this movie.
Yeah, he is. He's really fantastic. And I mean, he comes across as sort of like, the sensitive man. And I think in placing him as a character, he's supposed to be like the new, more sensitive man of the early 70s, the kind of man that feminists would like. But even towards end, he turns into a vampire, and we assume that he goes after Anne at that point. And it sort of picks up on this point that the feminists were making about how no matter which generation of men, they're all the same. They're still preying on women. So I just thought that was fascinating.
Well, I would also point out this an interesting thing to think about is that this is written by David Chase, who you mentioned, Kolchak. He was story editor on the Kolchak series. Later went on to the Rockford Files and Sopranos. So getting very early, young, in his 20s, gonna change the world kind of writer thing happening here with David Chase. And that's kind of interesting. Yes, that he's using vampire metaphor here to really comment on the political situation at that time, a social situation, and such a
I think it's weird because when I saw it, I didn't really think of any feminist themes exactly, but I did feel like it was commenting on masculinity. And I feel like of that because I felt like, William Smith usually played rough people. So he's going against type, playing a nice guy, and you're with him most of the movie. And then when he kind of loses it when he becomes full vampire.
Yeah. Also, like the whole like nice guy thing, like I know that using that terminology to refer to that type of dude who like seems like, a really nice guy, but actually he's a monster behind that facade. It was all a scam the whole time. But
and in this case,
feminists have been talking about this for decades, centuries, and so on. So
I see a lot of feminist
really
comments about that on my Facebook feed.
Listen, like if I call a man a nice guy, I don't mean it the way that it sounds if you take that literally. If I call him
I stopped using it.
Then I'm serious.
Yeah. You know what I say? I'm not a nice guy.
Dude.
Well, I say I'm not a nice guy. I'm a good man. I don't use nice guy.
You are a good man. Yeah,
when I was a nice guy,
what I like is I heard someone once point out that being a nice guy, quote unquote, is a choice, and you can be a terrible human being, but present yourself as a nice guy, because just being nice is a choice. You can be a terrible person and still
be nice and be like super duper racist. And I think that's what nice and be
exactly.
Yeah.
And so you got these people who put on that persona. They present to the world they're they're a nice guy, but in reality they're a vicious vampire who's just ready to rape you and then eat you.
That's like in Tom King's The Vision, and Vision tells his wife, you don't want to be a nice person, you want to be a good person.
Right.
There's The Vision.
I thought
the Marvel comics.
The Marvel character?
The Tom King, there was a 12-part series that Tom King
in the
did.
comic. Okay. Gotcha. Yes. Okay. I thought you in the movies. Okay, go ahead.
Because it's interesting
I'm a
that it also
Vision fan.
picks up on it sort of picks up on that whole Barnabas Collins thing, because if you remember, in that the first 2 seasons of Dark Shadows, Barnabas is a pretty nasty guy. And then all of a sudden, when you get back into that flashback to the 18th century, he becomes this really nice, sensitive man. So I'm kind of wondering.
He became popular, popular, so they softened him. They did a Todd Manning on him before Todd Manning.
They needed to. You're right. He was a nasty character. I mean, he's beating Willie Loomis. He was, he was gaslighting people right and left.
Good old Barnabas.
Yep, but then
great character.
Nice 60, I think 67 or 68. I can't remember exactly. So I think I'm betting that James probably picks up on that. But now there's this new message in that, hey, even nice guys can be dicks. Pardon the expression, but
I really thought he was really an old school nice guy, not the kind that's Keith's talking about, which is so common now, like incels and stuff. But I thought he was genuinely an actual good man, but got corrupted by his other nature.
Right.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think that's where it does pick up in because
he seemed like a reluctant vampire.
Good man.
So what's your conclusion on this film?
So this one I say is, I mean, as I said, I really think it is such a product of its times. And I also wonder too, if it also picks up on the Kolchak theme as well. The theme too is like, all the authorities say, oh, there's no such thing as a vampire. So everyone is ignoring it. Like, these are the evils at hand. And it's funny because like it reminds me of something that was going on in 1967. I don't know if you remember this, but supposedly Abby Hoffman and a few other these quote unquote hippies went to the Pentagon and tried to levitate it. They were going to exercise.
I do know.
And it talks about these evil emissions coming up from the Pentagon. So I'm thinking, is this symbolic of the nation?
Everyone I've read, everyone who was there, I've read, they said yes, it did happen. The people who were involved in making it levitate, they said yes, it did happen.
Well, they also
and then everyone else
drugs. So I'm just saying.
Yeah,
so it did happen.
There were drugs involved.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
No, you're right. It's pretty synchronous.
I always want to know how many people got arrested for shoplifting steal this book.
Oh yeah, that was a great book.
Yeah.
Okay, so tie that in with what you're saying about James. You're thinking about the Abby Hoffman. You
no,
before we sidetracked you.
The whole movie, the whole ethos of this movie, I think, really picks up with that. The evil is coming from inside. If you think about like the opening theme too, I mean, the opening scene, the credits, you have this like lizard and tarantula, coming from that coffin. I mean, it's like the evil coming from within, and you think about the fact that the vampire is more or less homegrown. So it's sort of like all this evil is coming from within the entity, like within the house, within the nation. And this is so different from like, the earlier movies where you have, the vampire presented as a foreign creature. He's from Transylvania and he's got a foreign accent. I mean, I think in some ways, even like,
that's a very American movie.
The first one. So I guess, I mean, like in this film and in Let's Scare Jessica to Death, the two vampires are homegrown. And I'd say the same thing. It also happens in, what's the other one with, the Velvet Vampire.
Oh,
so they're all. So I mean,
I love that
by
one.
this
Velvet Vampire is another one I watched during COVID.
Which one?
The Velvet Vampire.
Wait, which one?
Velvet
lesbian vampire movie, an American one.
Yeah.
I've watched that movie so
very interesting.
Times.
Anyway, sidebar.
Lamora and Velvet Vampire are two really the classics of that period for the lesbian vampire, that strong kind of woman character who's American, or at least seemingly American. It's ambiguous in Velvet Vampire where she's actually from, but she's hanging out in California, the desert or whatever. And that's a weird thing. She lives in the desert.
Her last name is Lefanu, right? I mean, of course, that picks up on Sheridan Lefanu, but I mean, she sounds American. She does not seem foreign like the other vampires, like the ones in in Hammer.
Oh, Diane Lefanu.
I mean, she's definitely. Yeah. But I mean, it's like they're all. So I think by this point, it is fascinating that all the vampires, not all of them, but many of them are homegrown, except maybe for like, say, Count York. I mean, he's definitely foreign. I think he's from Bulgaria, which is actually associated with the communist countries at that time. Yeah. But it is interesting that you have this sort of theme going on with like, the native born vampire, the fact that it is within our nation. We have the rot is within. Just like the opening scene with
I really like that. Yeah.
So that's how it's it really is a commentary on, I guess, American life at this point. And it's right. Now what I can't remember is whether this was being made when Watergate was being revealed, because that took place around 1972.
Well, it was happening. It was happening in 72. So the break-in happened in 72. So the big reveals came afterwards. More, I would say look more towards 73, but it was starting. I mean, the arrests had happened and the tumultuous Democratic and Republican conventions had happened.
Yeah, that was 68.
And all that. And I'm saying in 72. I'm 72. So we had that whole thing, and the break-ins happened in 72. So but it really wasn't until I think 73 when it all started to come out, like what was actually going on there.
That's when I first heard it. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, and
I
it
heard
like,
it.
basically torpedoed everything from the very beginning of Nixon taking office, or retaking office for his second term. Pretty much just got demolished after that. But anyway, that's a sidebar. Yeah, but I think the paranoia was beginning. I think the paranoia was starting already.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why so many of the horror movies after that become much more pessimistic, so that the evil is never defeated.
Yeah.
If you think about
the nihilism like that, they think about, to me, Night of the Living Dead is the landmark of that.
Yeah.
Nobody got out alive.
Right.
Nobody got out alive. And that was also an American American happening.
Yeah, and in that actually, one, we think our hero's gotten it, and then American
Ben
racism
gets killed by rednecks.
Yeah,
a bunch of redneck fuckers.
Amazing.
And then, like the last shots, it looks like a lynching where he's being thrown onto the pile.
Yep, that's just an incredible
that blew
movie.
My fucking mind when I first saw that.
Yeah, that changed everything. Changed everything. On this movie, though, Grave of the Vampires, I noticed a couple of things that, just for interesting sake, is that it was filmed for $50,000 in 11 days. So that's interesting,
right?
Yeah, and it's in public domain, so that's also interesting. So
that's why you encountered a lot.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty well regarded, or at least like the horror group circles that I occasionally go through whenever it comes up. They see it as just kind of a really good exploitation movie with William Smith. But I always saw it a little deeper than that. So I'm glad you put this.
I think there's more analysis to this one. It's worth a rewatch.
There is.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm gonna have to check it out because I haven't seen that one. So.
What'd you say?
Was it popular? Was it popular when it was first released?
No, I don't think it was. I mean, it probably made money in the drive-in, but I don't think it was a big hit.
I think it's one of those that sort of kind of just disappeared. Also, I noticed it mentions that there's two different cuts, that there was an edited down version for American audiences, and then there's an uncut for European. I'm curious if the Blu-ray, if that's the European version or not, from
probably uncut.
I mean, Scream Factory tends to go and try to find, the best version of it when they put these things out.
They're very thorough.
So I'm going to guess that's probably the European version. Might be the one to look for if you're looking for a Blu-ray hard copy. You can probably get it on archive.org.
Francis,
I know that. I know that. Yeah, sorry. Go on. What were you going to say, Henry?
I was just wondering if you had any kind of remarks that we could segue into Kaelyn, because she's going to kind of hit some of the same territory, but also different.
Oh, what are you talking about, Kaelyn?
Lesbian vampire movies, like in general.
But they're vampires. But they're European.
They are. Yeah, the two that I picked to talk about are European.
Therefore, they're more overt for their time, more than Americans would show.
Right.
Yeah. I have to admit, I have not watched the European vampire. I mean, the European lesbian vampire films. So I've been
trying to get you to watch it for a year.
Yeah.
If I was in your town, I'd just come over and we'd put on Tubi and watch like 5 of them. So, any more thoughts on your two picks? Or are you pretty good with relinquishing to Miss Kaelyn?
I'm fine. She can go on.
Awesome.
You did a great job. Thank you.
Yes, loved it. And I'm definitely gonna have to check out that second one that you talked about, because I haven't seen that one and I am very intrigued.
It's on YouTube. It's on nice. Last look, it was on YouTube.
I'm gonna have to look it up. That's awesome.
I think it's on Tubi. Yeah.
Cool. If it's public domain, it's going to be pretty much everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Let's Scare Jessica is actually on Internet Archive, so you can find it there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that's on Blu-ray too, though, if you want to buy it.
Yeah. I downloaded my copy from archive.org. That's where I've got mine.